He honore he gloria ki te atua, he maungarongo ki te whenua, he whakaaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa, tihe mauri ora. Now, for those of you keeping track at home, we are not following the liturgy today again. I think last time I also didn't quite do it right, but this time it's on purpose. Instead, I'm going to be reading a passage from Acts that I think you'll see has some relevance to what I want to talk to you about today. So first, let me just do that reading. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was deeply troubled by all the idols he saw everywhere in the city. He went to the synagogue to reason with the Jews and the God-fearing Gentiles, and he spoke daily in the public square to all who happened to be there. He also had a debate with some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers, when he told them about Jesus and his resurrection, they said, "What's this babbler trying to say with these strange ideas he's picked up?" Others said, "He seems to be preaching about some foreign gods." Then they took him to the high council of the city. "Come and tell us about this new teaching," they said. "You are saying some rather strange things, and we want to know what it's all about." It should be explained that the Athenians, as well as foreigners in Athens, seem to spend all their time discussing the latest ideas. So Paul, standing before the council, addressed them as follows: "Men of Athens, I notice that you are very religious in every way. For as I was walking along, I saw your many shrines, and one of your altars had this inscription on it: 'To an unknown God.' This God, whom you worship without knowing, is the one I'm telling you about. He is the God who made the world and everything in it. Since he is the Lord of heaven and earth, he doesn't live in man-made temples. And humans can't serve his needs, for he has no needs. He himself gives life and breath to everything, and he satisfies every need. From one man, he created all the nations throughout the whole earth. He decided beforehand when they should rise and fall, and he determined their boundaries. His purpose was for the nations to seek after God and perhaps feel their way towards him and find him, though he is not far away from any of us. For in him we live and move and exist, as some of your own poets have said. We are his offspring. And since this is true, we shouldn't think of God as an idol designed by craftsmen from gold or silver or stone. God overlooked people's ignorance about these things in earlier times, but now he commands everyone everywhere to repent of their sins and turn to him. For he has set a day for judging the world with justice by the man he has appointed, and he proved to everyone who he was by raising him from the dead. When they heard Paul speak about the resurrection of the dead, some laughed in contempt, but others said, "We want to hear more about this later." That ended Paul's discussion with them. But some joined him and became believers. Among them were Dionysius, a member of the council, a woman named Damaris, and others with them. Once a year, people get up before dawn, face the cold, and go out into a service where they face the rising light. They remember those that they have lost, and they sing songs and offer karakia to their God. I'm speaking, of course, of Anzac Day, as you all knew. We do this actually, this is a very similar tradition than what's practiced around Matariki and what's practiced around Anzac Day. But the funny thing is when we approach Anzac Day, few people ask, is there a risk here that we're putting nation before God? Is there a risk that we might be syncretistic in our faith? So we don't think of it that way. And I just want to throw that out there as a starting point for us to, when we're looking, because we're going to look at Matariki, and as we look at it, I want to keep in mind that we have our own ways of approaching things that may be different, and we need to do some work to make sure we're teasing apart ideas. See, there's a nation across the ocean where nation and Christianity are not so easily separated at the moment. You might have noticed it, it's in the news quite a lot on the rise of Christian nationalism. Now, I don't think that's what's happening with the dawn service, but there is a risk that it could go that way. Just speaking of that nation that's across the ocean, you might have noticed my accent. I come from that nation across the ocean, the United States of America. And so I just need to name the elephant in the room because I'm going to be talking about Matariki, but I have no Māori whakapapa, and I wasn't even born in this land. So why should I be up here speaking at all? Well, what inspired me to go down this path is just being aware of how my own nation has failed utterly in this regard, with regards to the indigenous peoples of the Americas. 150 treaties, and I'm pretty sure we've broken every one of them. No language honored in any public ceremonies whatsoever. This inspired me to notice that there's a better story in this land. Not a perfect story, but a better story if we're willing to have eyes to see and ears to hear. So, Manawatia a Matariki. This mata, some of you will know, let's see if I can go back there. The Pakeha name for Matariki is the Pleiades, or the Seven Sisters, and it sits at the heart of Taurus the bull. Now, for those of you not accustomed to looking at this is Orion. Some of us from the northern hemisphere see it the other way around. And this down here is the horns of Taurus the bull. So you have to imagine these were all named by people in the northern hemisphere, so they flipped them around. Now, if you follow the Orion's belt through the face of Taurus, you find the heart of the bull, which is where Matariki, or the Pleiades cluster, can be found. So, Matariki, mata meaning eyes, and riti meaning small. The small eyes is one name given to this star cluster. Matariki, or more formally, Namata o te nui ariki tawhiri matia. Say that 5 times fast. Is the name, another name given to it. That meaning is the eyes of the Lord, the eyes of the God. And this is more commonly attributed as the origin of the name of the stars of Matariki. And as I named him just there, Tawhiri Matia is one of the Māori gods. So you'll see that what I want to talk to you about today has some bearing, because this national holiday is built around a tradition that references foreign gods, or for those of you from here, the local ones. So how do we approach this as a nation? Matariki became a public holiday in 2022. As far as I know, it's the first in any Western nation to honor an indigenous tradition. But many of us are still unsure how to engage this tradition. Dr. Rangi Matamua is probably more responsible than any other person for the recognition of this holiday. He's Tuhoi. He's a professor of Maturanga Māori. He's the chief advisor to the government on the Matariki public holiday, and he's also the author of the official Matariki Karakia, Te Arawhiti, written in 2023. He's written a very well-read book called Matariki, the Star of the Year, which outlines his ideas around how Matariki could be revived, how we could recover the ancient ancestral ways. And there's a lot of great content in this book. I want to acknowledge that up front. But I have heard in some interviews with him that he has stated publicly that his goal is that Matariki, and in particular the worship of the old gods, would become the new marker of Kiwi identity in the way that rugby has. So that might have you going, I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure I'm ready to embrace other gods, as part of my marker of my Kiwi identity. You can see where people might get a little bit nervous about some of that language. Now, I'm not saying he shouldn't. I'm just saying this is what he has said as a goal. So this isn't a question just for Pakeha. There are many Māori Christians who also who are struggling with the questions of how do I honor the ancient traditions and recognize my beliefs in God. And there are various ways people approach this. Now, there can be some unhelpful ways. I don't know how many remember the January newspaper featuring this guy, Steve Gibson, the Hastings counselor. Does anybody remember seeing this story? A few of you? Yeah, so he made it into the newspapers because a council meeting was going to be held on a marae, and he said publicly, I'm sorry, I can't attend because of my Christian beliefs. See, in the marae, there are carvings of Atua, and he said that conflicted with his Christian faith. He also said that he was concerned that the heavy use of tereo would preclude the inclusion of some people in the service. He even likened it to inviting council to hold their meeting right here during church service where they had other beliefs. Now, I don't know Steve at all. I don't know where he is on his faith journey. He might be a relatively new Christian and still be working some things out. He might be sensitive in some ways that I am not. But when I first heard this story, I died a little bit inside. Because what I knew every time one of these stories hits the headlines is the rest of the non-Christian people of this nation will look at this and say, those Christians, there they go again. See how judgmental, how petty they are. Can't even walk into a marae. I believe there has to be a better way. But I do understand that there is a real fear here. I have a friend who's going through a rough separation from his wife. And his wife, who's been Christian her whole life, as a result of their difficulties they've been going through, has given up going to church. She's giving up praying to God. And at the encouragement of some of her friends, she's now started praying to the Māori gods instead. And this is one person I know, and I know this is not an isolated story. So you can see why some Christians might get a little bit nervous about what's going on here. How do we walk in this space between these two ideas? I believe there has to be a better way, perhaps the via media, as Carolyn was referring to last week, a way in between these two extremes of embracing the Māori gods or rejecting participating in anything remotely Māori to begin with. And I believe that Paul, in the Areopagus, in his visit to the Areopagus, gives us a clue for how that might work. Now, if you're familiar with Acts, chapters 16 and 17 detail Paul's visits to quite a number of different locations as he was visiting where various churches were being set up. And in most of those encounters, there were large groups of Jewish Christians who were there in those spaces. And when he visited them, he specifically referenced their scriptures, what we call the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. And he showed from those scriptures how they pointed towards Jesus. He also quoted from their prophets to show them how they spoke about Jesus who was to come. But when Paul arrives in Athens, it's a very different story. He's not going into a dominantly Jewish audience. He's going into Greek culture where they don't know the scriptures. And he never once in his conversation with these Athenians, as far as we know, directly references those scriptures or calls on the prophets. Instead, he notices what's right there in front of him. Notice one of the passages that we read said this, Men of Athens, I notice that you are very religious in every way. For as I was walking along, I saw your many shrines, and one of your altars had this inscription on it, to an unknown God. This God whom you worship without knowing is the one I'm telling you about. He is the God who made the world and everything in it. Paul takes notice of what they have in their view, what they recognize, and he says, I see that, but I see through it to something greater on the other side of that, and that's what I want to tell you about. But that's not all Paul does. This part of Acts 17 is a quote. In him we live and move and have our being. He's quoting Epimenides of Crete, a 6th century, who wrote in the 6th century BC. This is from a poem to Zeus. Most of you will be familiar with the name Zeus from Greek mythology, eh? So, a poem to the Greek god, and Paul is quoting it, again saying, this is what you see in your own gods, and I say that's true, but let me point you to the rest of the story. He also quotes, we are his offspring from Aratus, from the Phenomena book in the 3rd century BC, also writing a poem to Zeus. Paul knows this is to Zeus. His hearers know this is to Zeus, but he's pointing beyond that. He's recognizing where they're at and their starting point and naming what he sees that's true and valuable in that. So in this engagement, I think Paul gives us at least 3 principles about how we might approach Matariki in a better informed way as Christians. So Paul's principles for engagement. Look for what's genuinely true. Now, you don't have to try to make things fit where they don't fit, but name what you see that is genuinely true and name the God that those truths point to. Now, when I read that second one, I just want to caveat, remember that Paul was invited to speak by this group of people. So when he's offering his thoughts, it's at their invitation. And I think this is an important point for us. We don't go into somebody else's space and start offering our thoughts about what they're doing. We enter their space as guests, to listen, to participate perhaps, but not to tell them what to think, unless invited to do so, in which case you have the freedom, as Paul did, to name what you see that goes beyond perhaps what they see. But always do it with respect for where they are. And so I just want to, in a moment, I'm going to retell the story of Matariki. And I want you to be listening to the story and to see where you see through lines that point to God. I just need to say up front, though, that because I don't whakapapa Māori, that my version of the story is wrong, and the one that your iwi gave to you, that's the right one. And if your iwi says something different than his iwi, yours is right. Yours is right. Whoever. I know how this story goes. This is not the authoritative version I'm telling. This is just a version of the story. So, let's start. So some of this I got from this book by Gavin Bishop, but a few other sources I've quoted as well. So, before anything, there was Io Matua Kore, the unparented Io. Io was, in some iwi's understanding, the supreme God, the first God, the uncaused God before all things. I noticed that Io is also referenced in other Pacifica cultures as well. So although not universally recognized, this is a part of the tradition. Io Matua Kore came to being in Te Kore. Te Kore is the void. There was nothing. Out of the nothingness emerged Te Po, the world of darkness. From Te Po slowly emerged Te Ao Marama, the world of light. And in this world of darkness and light, there lived 2 beings, Papatuanuku, the earth goddess, and Ranginui, the sky father. These 2 were locked in eternal embrace, and they had numerous children who became the other Māori gods, or who are now called the other Māori gods. In their embrace, these children were born, but they were squashed between mother and father with no room to breathe or move. And so they just started discussing this and coming up with a plan. And they wanted to create a separation to give themselves some space. So Tane Mahuta, has anybody seen this Tane Mahuta? A few of you? Up in the Kodi forests up north. So Tane Mahuta, as the god of the forest, was also the strongest of the children. And so Tane agreed. He laid down on his back on Papatuanuku, pressed his feet against his father, and pushed and pushed and pushed until he created separation between them. Finally, in this separation, there was room for light to enter. There was room to live and to breathe. But one of the children, Tafiri Matia, the god of the storms and the winds, wasn't on board with this plan. And to him, this separation felt like a real rupture, a source of grief. And in his grief, he did something truly remarkable. He ripped out his eyes and cast them into the heavens. And as he did so, they stuck to Ranginui, his father, and they became the stars that we call Matariki. And that is the origin of Namata Ote Nui Ariki Tafiri Matia, or Mata Ariki. This 7 or 9 stars, again, depending on which iwi you belong to, that make up Matariki, each represent a variety of different sources of food predominantly. Now, Matariki is one of the stars, and Matariki is the mother, considered to be the mother of the other stars here, represents well-being and health and happiness. Pohutukawa, you'll notice, reminds us of those who've died in the past year. Most of these through the middle are sources of food, where Maori first found food, in the sky from birds, or in the canopy of the tree. Sometimes they found food in the streams, or in the ocean, or growing in the land. And it was the wind and the rain that enabled these food sources to grow. So part of Matariki is a celebration of food and the provision of food. And then finally, you have Hiwai Te Rangi, who reminds us about our hopes and dreams and goals for the coming year. So out of the story of these 3 stars, there are 3 traditions that are commonly associated with Matariki. Many of you may already be familiar with these 3 traditions. One of those is to remember those who've passed. As the Matariki rises, people would call out those that they remember, who they acknowledge who've passed in the past year. They also have the time of coming together for kai with hangi and giving thanks for the gifts of food that sustain life. And they look forward to the hopes and dreams for the coming year. Now, I believe this is a tradition that all of us can embrace, giving thanks in our own ways to our God, but still we can participate in this. Mauri Marsden, I've got one of his books here. Mauri Marsden was a Christian theologian writing around 1920. And for him, this is a story that hasn't been recorded, but is reported to have been said by him. He said that before the gospel came to this land, Maori could see the mountain, but the peak was shrouded in mist. And that after the gospel arrived, now the mountain could be seen clearly in light of the gospel. He gives us an approach to recognizing what's true, and that people all over the world can see indicators of God while not having the full truth of everything that's been revealed in Jesus. So what does this mean for us as a church, a multicultural church today operating in Aotearoa? How might we engage honestly and with respect? Another Christian theologian, have any of you met Dr. Jamie Martinga? Yeah, Paul. I've met him a couple of times. He's a really warm, humble guy, but he's written this really fantastic paper that I'm going to refer to in a minute. So Dr. Jamie is Ngāti Kahungunu. He's Ngāti Porou and Ngāi Tahu. He's a Māori theologian, and he's also the executive director of the World Evangelical Alliance Commission. That's a long name. Anyways, he's done some great things and great work in this space. And he's written this paper, which that previous link was a PDF a link to this PDF, which you can find online, Google it for yourself. Matariki and Biblical Perspectives. And I think he gives us some of the best framework for how to approach this as Christians. He says, worship requires a sense of submission to and dependence upon an entity for one's life and well-being. Distinct from worship, a relationship is much more mutual and far less dependent, especially on supernatural power. To namihi na'atua is to give them something akin to a nod of the head or tip of the hat, a recognition of their existence in the service of the Creator. We go, as Christians, that far and no farther. Acknowledgement is an act of respect, not worship. He sees this ability for us as Christians to engage in Matariki in a way that's honest. But we also have to be careful. We can't go too far. We shouldn't be telling Māori how to conduct Matariki. We also shouldn't be co-opting some of the sacred components of that. As we participate, when Māori are leading, recognize that we are guests and operate as guests in the same way that we would want guests to come into this place to engage. You can show respect. You don't have to worship these gods if you don't believe in them, but you can come into this place. In the same way we can enter into services where Matariki is being honored, even where perhaps steam from the hangi is being offered. We don't have to participate in that, but we can give thanks to God for the food as they give thanks to others. Speaking of giving thanks for the food, you know that next week we're going to be gathering all together and having the combined service, and afterwards the soup, right? So this is a chance for us to practice one of the Māori traditions, the giving thankfulness for the food and enjoying good kai together. I hope you'll also take the opportunity to think about what you'd like out of the year ahead. But just now for a few moments, I want to give us a chance to practice one of these traditions. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to pray briefly, and then I'm going to invite you, if you've lost someone in the past year, but I'm not going to necessarily limit it to that, you can go beyond that if you like. If you've lost someone in the past year, I'm going to invite you to just stand where you are, tell us something briefly about them, who they are, what they meant to you, something that you remember. And when you're finished and you sit back down, if you're comfortable, the rest of us will join in and say, we remember. Hopefully that makes sense to you all. And please, if you feel totally uncomfortable with any of that, don't do it. This is not a request. This is just an opportunity to engage if you would like to. So let me pray. E te atua, homai ki amato to aroha to maramatanga I tēnei wā. God, give us your love and your wisdom in this moment to know how to engage well with the people, tangata whenua, the people of this land, how to engage well with te atua Māori, how to engage well with our own stories. And in this moment, as we pause to remember those we may have lost, I pray that you would just be here comforting us and honoring the memory of those who've gone. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.